Initially, I wanted to research the impact of standardized testing on students with emotional disorders. When I was working on my practicum in special education, I was working with students who were far below grade level in reading and math and also have social, emotional, or intellectual disabilities. That school took on students whose needs could not be met by their home district. The students still needed to take the PSSAs just like their peers at their home school districts, but they were not like those typical students. These students have emotional concerns that cause them to react strongly to stressful situations and do not like being given tests that are at a level far above their learning level. But federal law says they must be tested with same-age peers. It seems downright cruel. There has to be a way around it. Over the summer, I started looking at legal loopholes that parents and other teachers have found. There was a moral objection type loophole in the original No Child Left Behind, but they got rid of that with the Every Child Succeeds Act, somehow forcing students who cannot read on level to take a reading comprehension test will help them succeed. No, Betsy, it does not help every child. I looked around. I saw individual students and heard and read anecdotes. Mommy blogs might be peer-reviewed, but the peers are just other parents. The magazine Education Week doesn't count as scholarly. Unless kids can be turned into statistics, their experiences can't affect policy change. Then this class came along. Aha! I can use this class to find research and statistics that I can hand to some policymakers and get my students out of the misery of PSSAs because I will have current domestic data. With this class, I will learn how to find the data that prove without the shadow of a doubt that federal policy forcing kids to take tests is dumb. But I couldn't find it. Even with all the access we have, I couldn't find enough current, peer-reviewed, scholarly journals with downloadable text that could supply my data. I submitted 3 articles on the subject, but they weren't any good, and Dr. Sheedy let me know they weren't right for what we were doing here. Back to the proverbial drawing board. Maybe I can look at the evils of standardized testing looking at typical kids rather than my exceptional students. Maybe if I can show that even the typical kids experience undue test anxiety, I'll prove my point. I read several articles, all of which said that typical kids experience test anxiety, and sometimes the anxiety is beneficial, pushing them to succeed. Well, that doesn't help my argument at all. So I'm going to put my personal bias ahead of my research and continue looking for studies that reflect my hypothesis so I can prove myself right. I changed focus to general test anxiety among students with a variety of educational needs, from typical students to those with intellectual disabilities. And one study talked about predictors of test anxiety. It checked all the boxes I had read about by the end of the second week of class, and I was sure it was a good article because the researchers were at an institute at a university. Institutes are full of super smart people who always follow the rules. But it turns out they were pretty much just there to prove themselves right. They had started some great research a couple of decades ago and became an authority on test anxiety using their own data collection tools. They created reliable and valid tests that may or may not have been reviewed outside their own institute. Dr. Sheedy taught us better than that. We have learned through careful examination, even people with the word doctor in their name might not be the end-all, be-all, foremost authorities in their fields. Still, I wrote a careful review of this quantitative article and looked for new, better articles for my qualitative article review. The more I read in the Macmillan text and watched the lectures, the more devoted I became to finding good data to support my opinion that standardized tests are evil and should never be given to non-standard learners. My qualitative article review was better than my quantitative one. I had learned to scrutinize better. I had learned through our readings and discussions that researchers really shouldn't be citing themselves as the best experts in the field. And I learned that we, as consumers of research, need to scrutinize more. I found an article that involved my preferred topic of test anxiety. Check. In a peer-reviewed journal. Check. That was less than 10 years old. Check. That was domestically relevant. No check. Actually, it was in suburban England. But the fact that it was a working-class white majority population matched my other study from suburban Minnesota. Maybe it wasn't domestic, but it sort of matched. By now, I was even more motivated to find the perfect article for my mixed methods review. Now that I actually knew the difference between a hypothesis and an assumption and the difference between triangulation and correlation, and I was determined to find the right kind of article for my third article. I searched high and low to find domestic, current, valid, peer-reviewed, scholarly articles about mixed methods studies on test anxiety and all of its perils. At last, I came across an article entitled, "Is Test Anxiety a Peril for Students with Intellectual Disabilities?" Well, I noted that the researchers used the word peril just like I did. No American uses the word unless they want to sound pretentious or are an English teacher. Turns out that study was in a white working-class suburb of Sydney, Australia. Well, it was peer-reviewed, check. It was relatively recent, check. It even had working-class suburban kids in it, just like my other articles. It worked. But this one was different. It had stuff the others didn't. This one had research questions and a formal distinction between its hypotheses as they pertain to the quantitative and qualitative elements of their study. This one went into detail about how their study differed from past studies and was meant to lead to further study of test anxiety, specifically as it affects special education students during high-stakes statewide testing. This was my article. This was the one that would finally make me understand how research needs to be examined. This is the article I found like 6 days ago. Anyway. As we as educators and researchers look at studies and articles and data and whatnot, we do have to consider our own biases. We need to check our privilege and education. We need to find out if we're looking for validation or actually looking to answer unanswered questions. As we read more and more and learn more and more and try to come up with solutions, we really must check to see what we are looking for and if we have found it. This goes for more than just graduate school. This goes beyond fact-checking your acquaintances' post on social media. This goes for everything. Check people's sources. Check authors' methods. Check to see if what you're reading has real merit and truth. Find out if the facts are part of more than just one reality.